Now, former Eskom CEO Ruyter has been facing tough questions in Parliament today. The Standing Committee on Public Accounts invited Ruyter following his explosive interview with eNCA, in which he spoke of rampant corruption at the power utility. Scopa was hoping to get more information and who is involved, and if Ruyter reported matters to authorities. Now, to discuss what's come out of that session, I'm joined by independent analyst Khaya Sithole as well as Rudie Heyneke from the organisation Undoing Tax Abuse. Khaya, I'm going to start with you, and I wonder what you think about Ruyter as a person who was called before the committee. Evasive, maybe. We didn't get much from this particular session, especially what South Africans were waiting for.
Yeah, good afternoon to the viewers. So I think obviously there was a high level of anticipation, basically based on what we had heard in the interview that he had done in February. But I think obviously the huge distinction between you and I doing an interview versus a legal structure like Parliament asking you to provide it with insights and details on what you're talking about is that the burden of proof exists in Parliament. In an interview, you and I are free to express an opinion. And I think obviously one of the biggest problems here is that in the absence of a properly crafted submission to Parliament that should have happened in advance to explain exactly this is what I said in February, this is who said this, and this is the basis for me coming to these conclusions. It was always going to be very difficult for parliamentarians to actually know what to ask. And I think that it looks like they didn't really anticipate how this was going to flow. And the fact that suddenly this is a man who's not so keen on providing information means that it was a stillborn exercise from the moment it started.
And Khaya, I mean, with him also just reminding them that, listen, I told you I'd give you 3 hours of my time. Your time's up. This is what he told Parliament.
That doesn't help because, unfortunately, all of us that have seen how Parliament works and a person like him who has continuously presented to Parliament, issues emerge as a presentation goes. So a particular time frame does not always mean that people will stop talking about a particular time frame. And I think in this instance, given the importance of what he said he was going to tell us, given the scale that he mentioned, I mean, he's talking about the single most important company in the country. He was the CEO, and he says to us, I know things about this organization. I know things about the politicians that oversee this organization that I think the public ought to know. So for him not to even be in a position to dedicate the time that would be enough for it to be sufficiently ventilated, it does unfortunately leave too many lingering questions unanswered about what his true motivations behind that initial interview was.
And Rudie, that actually brings me to my question to you. I mean, Scopa also saying in itself that it's been left even more confused than they were when they watched that interview on eNCA. They were expecting somebody who would be able to give them information. And an interesting question that came up was the fact that he did say that he did report this to the Minister, Pravin Gordhan, last June or July. And then he was asked if the Minister at least knows the names of these high-ranking politicians. What do you make of his answer when he again said, let's rather wait for the Minister to be the one that comes here and lets you know if he knows the names?
Yes, I think, it's quite a difficult situation for him, but he said on numerous times today that he did submit all the evidence and he did submit all the intelligence reports that he referred to the Commissioner of Police. He did name the so-called high-profile politician to Minister Gordhan, and that if the committee wants to get more information, they should call these individuals to the committee to report on that. I think the whole of South Africa, and like Khaya mentioned, is disappointed that we didn't get the information that we were looking for, especially the names of the people that he mentioned in the interviews. But I also think he mentioned the investigations. He doesn't want to compromise the investigations. My question is, do we have proof of these investigations? And for that, I hope that Scopa will call the DPCI and to confirm that they are really having this information, number one, and two, that they are conducting the investigations.
So then we're still left with it just being gossip, right? Unless we are given the proof that there are investigations that are going ahead. And, you know, as a person, De Ruyter said that he's a person who supports accountability. With how he was in Parliament today, avoiding to answer some questions, Rudie, would you say that that's a fair statement, that he's a person who supports accountability?
Well, at least I must say he did appear in Parliament on an invitation and not had to be summoned to come there. We've seen in the past that people had to be summoned to come and present something before a portfolio committee. So that is one thing that I think is in a good sense. But I think the key for me lies in what Mr. De Ruyter said, and that it's all about the investigations. If there's no investigations going on, then serious questions should be asked. If there are investigations going on, can we have some feedback as the public, as the actual shareholders of Eskom? Can we have some feedback on that? And if then the other question is a parliamentary ad hoc committee looking into this. It was mentioned at Scopa as well today. And that was put down by the majority party a week or so ago. The question is, if everybody is committed to fight corruption and to be accountable, to be held accountable and believe in accountability, shouldn't we, see that Parliament is doing their bit as well in a thorough investigation?
And I wonder if they were able to actually, be as stern as we expect Parliament to be, Khaya, especially in terms of the state capture report coming out to say that Parliament is also part of the problem when it came to state capture, because it wasn't practicing its oversight role adequately enough to make sure that there is accountability. But also at the moment, Scopa is discussing the way forward, whether or not they should call the Eskom board to also come and account, but also Pravin Gordhan, Khaya, and I wonder what you think about the fact that he also admitted that he was given a report last year already about the corruption that Andre De Ruyter was saying is taking place at Eskom. Yet we haven't seen the proof that Rudie, for instance, is saying is there in terms of investigations.
Well, that's the difficult part about how Andre De Ruyter approached all of this. Remember, he didn't have to wait until February to actually press the trigger and say, I've got access to this information. At that particular point in time, when he was the CEO of Eskom, he actually had a responsibility to ensure that, look, if he discovers that money is being stolen at Eskom, when there was a duty to ensure that he followed up on it. In fact, the question must be, did he actually put these cases himself? Did he open cases with the Hawks, for example, in relation to these particular issues? It's not very clear from where we are. And also the question of the information that underpinned what he said in that interview. He seemed to give the impression now that since he no longer works at Eskom, he no longer has access to that particular information. But that's a difficult one to buy, because the key issue here is that this wasn't a normal resignation where somebody says, look, it's been good, guys, I'm walking away. This was a person who took it upon himself to say that just before I walk away, I want to tell the country that what I'm leaving behind is essentially a cesspit of corruption. So that obviously creates an expectation that you're going to at least be able to provide information that simply gives us a framework to work from. So we should be able to say today that when he came to Parliament, he said, look, in relation to a question of this nature, a case has been opened. That's where the case was opened, and this is what I said, and therefore please do a follow-up. So what he has done is that he's given Scopa absolutely nothing to work with except the question of how do you distill and translate what is essentially gossip onto something tangible so that you can exercise accountability. At this particular point in time, there's no point in them coming back after 1 o'clock. There's nothing for them to do because there's nothing for them to work with. They can't even call up the Hawks and say, look, we've been told that 6 or 7 cases are open. Tell us when they're open, tell us what the status, and tell us when you can come back. So it's really been an exercise in futility in many respects.
And I mean, Khaya, a lot of South Africans on Twitter were saying the same thing, whichever ones were watching. They were saying, well, what was the whole purpose of this exercise then? Because we are left, none the wiser in terms of information that has come out. But then let me ask you the question that I asked Rudie. What do you think about Andre De Ruyter saying that he's a person who supports accountability? And he was questioned about whether or not he made follow-ups after, reporting cases, and he said no.
Look, I suppose you and I tend to have a different level of curiosity in relation to matters that we raise. So if I go and report a case, I've got a vested interest in checking if the state is following up, and if the police are not giving me a response, I need to check. Yeah, so, but apparently people at that level have a different understanding of what it means to actually take on the responsibility and say, I believe there's enough for the police to act on, so therefore when they don't act, I need to know why. So it's very, very, very difficult to figure out how a person actually just simply disengages themselves from a process that they say that they champion. And the more difficult question is that intersection between his duties and his responsibilities to Eskom when he was still the CEO versus him now being an outsider, because when he was a CEO, he should have done this. He should have been the one that actually says, I'm going to report these particular cases. And if it turns out that there's a politician who's blocking him or somebody else who's becoming the bottleneck, then that's what he needs to say to the public so that the public will know that, well, actually, this person wasn't making up these things. And in fact, even as recently as this week, he was still saying that the 1 billion rand estimate was itself a conservative one. So this is a person who clearly has an idea on what the number is. If you're telling us that 1 billion rand is not the right number, well, you have a framework from which you've determined that it's not the right number. So to then walk around and then say, well, actually, you guys must go and figure it out. I'm just telling you that 1 billion is not the answer. It just doesn't get us anywhere.
We're just left even more confused. Rudie, I just want to give you the last response in terms of what should be the next step. Khaya says that, meeting after 1 o'clock for Scopa doesn't make any sense. What do you think should be the next step for them? Should they wait for the Committee on Public Enterprises to call the Minister of Public Enterprises first and then take it from there? What should they do from here?
Yeah, I think it is important for the committee to call the people that Mr. De Ruyter mentioned today, the Minister, the Board of Eskom, the DPCI, and all the people that were mentioned, so that they can either deny or corroborate what De Ruyter said.
All right. Thank you very much to the both of you for speaking to us about this particular issue. A lot of people saying we've been left with no other information except the gossip that we were given back in February. That was independent analyst Khaya Sithole as well as Outer's Rudie Heyneke.